why on earth haven't we just started doing tiny homes? That's where the passion is. We have the full skill set. We, have done so much research into this and are just so passionate about the community. So,
welcome to the Tiny House Lifestyle Podcast, the show where you learn how to plan, build, and live the tiny lifestyle. I'm your host, Ethan Waldman, and this is episode 219 with the Saudes. Richard and Cassie Saude met and quickly built a tiny house together, and their relationship survived. So we start the conversation talking about how building a house together can be stressful, but wasn't for them. And then how they transitioned from living tiny to actually starting a professional tiny house company where they're now building tiny houses for others. In this conversation, we'll talk about how being a tiny home dweller creates a different perspective as a professional builder and helps them provide additional insight to their clients in the design and construction process. I hope you stick around. Let's face it, most tiny house dwellers want their tiny homes to be small, but not uncomfortable. That means reliable, unlimited hot water. Precision Temp's propane-fired hot water heaters reliably provide unlimited hot water, and they're specifically designed with tiny homes in mind. In fact, the NSP 550 model was installed in my own tiny home, and the reason I chose it was because it did not require a large hole in the side of my home like other RV hot water heaters. Instead, it mounts discreetly through the floor of the tiny house and works quietly and reliably. Right now, Precision Temp is offering $50 off any unit plus free shipping when you use the coupon code THLP. So head over to precisiontemp.com and use the coupon code THLP at checkout. All right, I am here with the Saudes. Richard and Cassie Saude have a classic love story, so naturally it started on Tinder. They bonded over their mutual love of the outdoors, tiny homes, playing music, and vegetarianism. They united to build their DIY tiny house, tied the knot, and then turned their lifestyle into their business. Richard brought a lifetime of construction experience, and Cassie a history of management and customer service. Cassie is the realist and the manager of the mundane. Richard is the dreamer and achiever. They're both artists at heart. As you can tell, this duo eats, sleeps, and works tiny. Richard and Cassie, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us, Ethan. We're super excited to be here.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah, glad to have you both here. So I'm curious because there's an old saying that says, build a house, lose your spouse. Was the relationship like you knew it was the one when you successfully built a house together, or was there ever any question?
No, absolutely. I think, a lot of people were curious throughout our build process, like, hey, how's things going? Is everything working out? And we're like, yeah, it's great. We work really well together. And so we're very lucky and fortunate to be able to have that with each other.
Mm-hmm.
I think we were pretty much a done deal when we started. Nothing was official. We weren't engaged or anything yet, but it was very much like I've found my representation of home in another person. And I think it definitely got cemented throughout the build process. The compatibility of our, communication working together and everything was really exciting. And it was a little nerve-wracking to start because we had lots of folks telling us, oh, you aren't supposed to build things together, building a house, that's a big deal. What if you guys, fight a lot? So we definitely were a little nervous going into it, but I have to say it was a pretty great process. And I already knew I was pretty blessed and a partner with Richard, and it just kind of shone throughout our whole build.
That's awesome. And so can you, what was the timeline of like meeting, starting to date, and then like building the tiny house? And whose idea was the tiny house anyway?
So we both.
No, you go ahead, go for it.
We actually both were into tiny homes before we ever met, and then we started dating about a year and a half before we started our build. And we lived together for a little bit before that.
Mm-hmm.
So we kind of got used to like the kind of lifestyle things that we do together, and with our 3 dogs. We had 4 dogs at the time. One of them has passed on since then, but yeah, so about a year and a half in, we started the plan process, got our trailer and everything, and then our build, all in all, working evenings and weekends. Mostly we both worked full time during the whole process.
Mm-hmm.
That took about 2 years, and then we got married about 6 months after finishing the house, I think. So, and that we've been in the house for about a year and 3 months now.
Nice. And do you live in Portland in the house?
We're in the Portland metro area, so we're out in
Okay.
the country.
Nice. And what was it like finding a parking site? Like what is your parking situation?
Sure. So when we started the build, we were living in a fifth wheel on my dad's property out in the country. We did our whole build process out there, and we're very fortunate to have that available to us. So we just kind of rented a parking spot from him. We did input all of our own utilities and everything, so that
Oh,
was
wow.
pretty exciting. We did all the manual labor for that, mostly by hand. We
Wow.
made some mistakes in that process trying to save money. So,
Yeah.
first piece of advice, if you have access to a ditch witch that you can rent, do it. It's worth every penny.
Yeah. Actually, I'd love to hear, I think people will be curious to hear about like what you mean when you say we put in all of our own utilities. Like what did that entail? What did you do?
Sure. So we pretty much did all of the digging and trenching. We had to run 300 feet of electrical and water. So we did all of the infrastructure for that before getting it inspected and everything.
Wow.
And basically it's permitted as an RV hookup. I'm sure I don't have to tell your following about how difficult it is if you're to say this is for a tiny home, but we did all of it prior to moving out there with our RV and prior to the build. So we were able to get all of that done with fewer questions, without having all of that in process. But yeah, primarily the things that we needed were our water and electrical hookup. We were on a 50 amp service on our house, and just a standard basic potable garden hose hookup. And then we did a composting toilet, so no sewer hookup or anything.
Got it. And so 300 feet of electrical, that's expensive. The wire is not cheap.
Yes, absolutely. We started at a really good time with our build. We started in the summer of 2019. And that was right before all of the prices skyrocketed for wood and whatnot, since it was pre-pandemic. We were extremely fortunate in our timing. We calculated that we basically wouldn't be able to afford to build our house today.
Wow.
With what we paid originally. Even just our plywood using for our sheathing was, I think, 8 times what it was.
Oh my gosh.
When we priced it out again.
Yeah.
I'm curious, like what did your house cost to build? Obviously, not counting the cost of your own labor versus what it would cost today.
Sure. Do you want to answer that?
Yeah. So we put a lot of higher end finishes and some exotic black walnut, and we kind of went all out necessarily on our house. So I think all in all, we're upwards of 40,000 in materials. That's with the chassis and everything included. But just even that, our trailer cost somewhere around 8,000, and now they run around 10, 11,000. So the increase in price over the last few years, even with steel, has been a lot. So I would imagine, material cost now to build our home is around 55, 60,000.
Wow.
Just with all the inflation and increase from the demand.
Yeah, that's significant. That's a big percentage.
Yeah.
And the home that you built, is that I'm on Lionheart Homes, which we'll get to, but is that the Duchess? Is that model based on your home?
Yeah.
That's her.
Nice. And so that's a 30-foot trailer, and is it 10 feet wide?
No, it's a standard 8 foot 6.
Okay.
For the clearance. So it's it's within the restrictions for the road.
Right.
But that, it took us, I think it took us about 8 months planning and designing the layout for our home
Hmm.
and that model for the Duchess.
What are some of the kind of features and highlights of that model?
I think one of the big ones that stand out is just kind of being expressive. We went with, the curved bay window in the front,
Hmm.
the shaped cedar shingles gives it a different look.
Hmm.
Using that darker teal color and bring that inside with the cabinets.
Yep. Yep.
Using all that black walnut. I mean, we just really pertain to using a lot of natural woods and kind of just not playing it safe, I think, is what we kind of went for in making it our own style.
Yeah, giving it some character.
Yeah. We definitely think model wise, and I know we're probably not going into that yet, but just model wise, our floor plan is just really livable. Like I said, we've lived there for over a year, and at this point, we have 3 dogs and 2 cats. So we really amplified the storage space. That was a really central focus for us, and
Hmm.
fitting that in everywhere we could. So that's a really big bonus on that model for anyone, that's looking to live tiny
Hmm.
versus to have, an Airbnb or something that they're just vacationing in. We really focused on that. So our, everything from the storage to our stairs are extremely accessible for the average person. I know sometimes tiny home stairs can be intimidating to folks because they look a bit treacherous. So
Yeah.
we really focused on that. And our bathroom is also a really generous size so that it's a comfortable space to shower in and, live life.
Yeah. Yeah. That's an important thing that, if you build really small, there's plenty of people who do it and live full time there. But, if your life expands a little bit or, you have some unexpected changes or just need a little bit more space, it can start to feel really small really quickly.
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. We have had one life change since we originally designed the house and since we were in the completion stage, and that was me changing from working off site to working from home. So
Yeah.
if folks take a look at our home, you'll see my work from home station with my computer and everything. That was actually not designed into the space. We just got really lucky that it worked out that way.
It kind of fit in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I don't think, my tiny house was designed for really one person working from there, and even then, it's the dining table is the desk is the dining table. It's not its own dedicated space, which is actually, it's kind of hard to not have a dedicated space for working. If you have to
Absolutely.
put it away every time.
Very true. I mean, sometimes you don't feel like you've left work then as well. When you have that dedicated space, you can just choose not to sit there or not
Yep.
to use that
Yep.
space during that time. And then you're not sitting there eating dinner going, oh, I didn't finish that report today. I should, maybe I'll just hop back on and work on that for a little bit.
Any special features for the pups in the house?
They have their own dedicated cabinet with all of their food and their toys and everything.
Nice.
And then
Nice.
we do have a section in our fireplace surround and our bookshelf that we built in for them to have little beds in there so they could have their own spots. We have two very small dogs under 7
Mhm.
pounds, and we did dedicate that area to them, although they typically prefer to be up on the sofa since that's where we hang out with
Yep.
them. So
Yep.
they're more comfortable there usually. But those were our two fun points that we put in for them, and pretty practical too.
Nice. Nice. So, at what point, well, did you go into the build, thinking like, hey, maybe I'll, we'll do this professionally afterwards? Or at what point did that transition happen?
We definitely started thinking and kind of dreaming about it. And a lot of it just came down to, you know, we love doing that so much and we love, being a part of the tiny community. And since we have the available skills, we're like, wow, we could really offer our services here, and we believe that we would really excel and be really talented and offering what we offer. So
Mhm.
it definitely started a little seed, and then it kind of grew from there.
Yeah, and so can you tell the story of like what that process was like? Kind of hanging up a shingle as a professional tiny house building company.
Yeah, so Richard was already in construction, like he'd mentioned,
Mhm.
for pretty much all of his adult life and beyond. Kids on work sites is a great idea. Um, but just going through that process and realizing that being in control of your own quality and being able to amplify other people's quality of life with the skill set that you have, he decided to go off on his own into contracting and has a business partner that we've worked with,
Mhm.
and basically went off, was doing contracting, and just kept going back to why on earth haven't we just started doing tiny homes? That's where the passion is. We have the full skill set.
Mhm.
We, have done so much research into this and are just so passionate about the community. So we had a big family conversation between us and our business partner Steven, and he was supportive of us changing directions, and our tiptoeing into the realm was what we lovingly refer to as ghost building. So we've been consulting for other tiny home companies that are already national brands,
Mhm.
and kind of taking them back to their roots and going, here's what we can work on for you. Here's what we can improve, because a lot of them have gotten so big that they have outsourced to builders and their quality has declined due to that. And so we've
Yeah.
kind of brought a force back in doing that. And that's kind of how we got our foot back in the door. So we are doing our own custom homes, have our own models, but we are also consulting for other existing tiny home companies and helping them get back on track so that our community benefits from maintaining that quality and just commitment to building great homes no matter what company you are.
Interesting. Yeah, it seems that in the process of scaling a tiny house company, I would imagine that it becomes easy or sometimes even necessary to kind of almost cut corners or to do things in a less careful way.
It definitely seems like folks have to let go of some things in order to be more efficient or in order to be more, I assume, lucrative.
Yeah.
And so it really does come down to either maintaining your scale and choosing to stay at a certain size and have a longer wait list, or, having less control over things and,
Yeah.
having to trust other folks to do that. So we've felt very fortunate to be able to get in there and help people kind of roll things back and go, you don't have to sacrifice these things to be,
Yeah.
you know, competitive and to, keep things going.
Yeah. I'm curious because I would imagine that many listeners or some listeners out there are in the process of looking at builders, and I know they'd be curious. Do you have any things that people should kind of look out for that would kind of, I don't know, clue them in to like, hey, this builder has maybe started to cut some corners, or just like, what are some things to look out for in that department?
I would, off the start, ask for a detailed inspection report on the home, just to make sure that all proper inspections were done
Mm-hmm.
with a legitimate inspection service,
Mm-hmm.
whatever entity that might be. That's super important. And just, seeing what kind of documentations they're willing to provide as far as how they do their process, what kind of quality control do they, processes do they have set in place to make
Yep.
sure that they limit the amount of warranty issues in their
Mm-hmm.
product,
Mm-hmm.
and that's pretty important, I think.
Yeah, that's so, it sounds like you wouldn't suggest working with a builder who's not certified.
You know, at the end of the day, I would recommend not. I mean, it's yeah, it's a fairly, you know big procedure to get certified and be able to build certified, but it's necessary. It keeps everybody honest, and it in my experience, I mean, it would I would never want to build anything that's not certified. I mean, it makes sense to at the end of the day.
And in addition to that being kind of assurance of the quality of your home that you're getting, it also ensures that if you're going to be traveling with it, that you can be parking in RV parks, etc. So that's kind of a multi-purpose process for that certification. It's to make sure that you're safe, things are done properly, and you can go the places that you want to go without hindrance.
Yeah. I asked John and Finn Kernahan of United Tiny House Association what they love about their Precision Temp hot water heaters, and here's what they told me.
Hey, Ethan, this is John and Finn Kernahan with United Tiny House Association.
We organize Tiny House Festival.
Oh, yeah, I guess so.
First and foremost.
We have a total of 3 Precision Temp on-demand hot water heaters. The thing we really like about these, and folks know this, I think they picked this up on Finn and I, if we don't like something, you'll never hear us talk about it. So the 2 things we noticed that we noticed and experienced immediately, they took painstaking effort to make sure that it was done right and installed. And so that was pretty cool right there. The other thing is the continuous on-demand hot water that just ran forever without any fluctuations or anything. I can't imagine an application, especially in our environment and our lifestyle of being the nomad, transportable, mobile, tiny lifestyle, where one of these units aren't good to use.
Are you planning to do any travel with your house?
We did not build our house intending on travel. So we are actually slightly over height.
Okay.
So yeah, so we did not plan on traveling with our home. Our whole process with our home was really intended on scaling down our lifestyle and being in control of our monthly expenses so that we could work towards owning our own property, because we felt like being stuck in an apartment and a rental of any sort was really going to negatively impact our trajectory for being able to get where we wanted to be in life, physically and financially. So we did take advantage of knowing that we weren't going to be moving regularly to make our house just a little bit over height so that we could have a little more headspace. And our Duchess models that we'll be custom building for folks, they will be within height restrictions, because we know that you have to get from point A to point B. We know that folks are probably going to want to travel, but we did not take that into consideration when we did our build, because we did not intend on traveling.
Right.
We are very keen on adding a van or other smaller movable home to our repertoire when we're ready to go on vacation, etc. But
yeah,
we'll see when we get to that point with the business. No vacations for us for a while.
Yeah. So, how has the business grown? It looks like, just looking at your Instagram feed, it looks like you've moved into a fairly large space.
Yeah. We're in about a 6,000 square foot commercial building right now that we are renting out. With all of the homes that we're working on, we typically have about 3 at a time going within that space. We do everything from the chassis up. We get the trailers in depending on what specific types of trailer we need. And once we get going, we have our own cabinet shop, do all of our own custom cabinets, painting. Pretty much everything is handmade by us and our team.
Wow.
So yeah.
And how many houses are you working on at a time?
About 3 at a time.
Okay. And why that number? Does that, is there some benefit to like doing more than 1 or 2, but not more than 3?
Yeah, so 3 fits the best in that 6,000 square foot area, allowing room to work and room to move around and for storage.
Yep.
And it also, for the team that we have, it works well having the 2 and 3 going at a time, so that there can be transition into different stages of those processes, and it's a
Yep.
little bit more of a fluid process of for completing these builds, having those, kind of staggered. You start one, it's getting framed. By the time
Mhm.
that house is into finished stages, you're starting to frame another one. So it's a good
Yep.
flow for our shop.
Nice. And are you building always stick framed, or are you doing any SIPs building or steel building?
We have done aluminum, the steel framing, and the zips in the past,
Mhm.
and we're open to it. A lot of the models and homes we're building right now have been predominantly stick built at the moment,
Okay.
but we venture into those other categories as well.
Cool. And that's just based on what the, client wants.
Yeah, it's a lot of preference and just kind of what works for that particular home.
Yeah. And how far out are you booking right now for homes?
So it depends on how custom the build is. So right now we have a house that's in the design process, but we won't be starting it until the beginning of next year because they chose to go with all custom windows.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to be absolutely gorgeous, and we're really excited to share that build when we get started. But our rep called us a couple weeks ago and said, I am so sorry, but these are out 32 weeks right now.
Oh my gosh.
So that's been changing things a little bit for us with the lead times.
Wow.
But right now on our just, more strategized builds that aren't custom, our existing models,
Mm-hmm.
if we go with one of those, we're looking at about 5 months out. And we do stagger it based on what we already have if we're working on somebody else's build, if we're ghost building. So right now we're probably looking at being able to take custom orders or more builds probably the beginning of the year.
Nice. What are some ways? Actually, first, I just wanted to ask how many have you built under as Lionheart and not for other builders or not consulting?
We've completed about a handful so far, and we're still a fairly new company, so we're definitely hitting our stride right now with getting our shop completely set up properly to
Mm-hmm.
meet the demand that we're now seeing, and also building for others and for ghost building. But yeah, so we've been we have our handful that we've done.
Nice. How would you say, or what are some ways that being a tiny home dweller created a different perspective as a professional builder, or some insight into the design and the construction process?
Sure, that's a great question. We have a really great ability to just place ourselves in a space and visualize using things and everything from how is this going to work when you move your house? How is this going to work when you have to hook up your house? How are you getting into your house? When you walk through your house, what are you seeing? What are you having to walk around? It's just a really immersive perspective, and it it's a good foundation because we live pretty basically, but we are able to build on that with what kind of hobbies do you have and kind of fit things into the space without having to retrofit things, since we can do things custom and we've experienced doing that for ourselves. We know what to ask people, we know what to look for, we have a great outlook on where to place things to make them tiny house friendly, but not tiny house dweller unfriendly.
Yeah. Richard, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Not really. She pretty much nailed it. I mean, it's a unique position to be in, just being able to picture ourselves in that space because that's the space we live in. So, thinking about the storage and thinking about, what a person needs and, what to watch out for too. Sometimes you can't have everything that you would like in that space, and it's really our responsibility to kind of understand that and relate that back to the client that is asking for these items in their home, and just being there for that support for them, so that they do end up getting that home that they want and that is functional at the end of the day.
Yeah, that's an interesting point of just like needing to be almost like the bad cop who says like, sure, we could squeeze this in, but it might affect your quality of life everywhere, and you might consider omitting something that you want but isn't as important as some other things.
Absolutely. And it really is always a continuous conversation with folks saying, hey, I know you really want this. We can do it. Here's what that would look like. Here's what it would look like if we didn't do that.
Yeah. Where did the name Lionheart come from?
That was my idea, and that's the strength in the name and having pride in what we do,
Mm-hmm.
and the loyalty and the courage to do this, and be there for everybody in the community. And that's kind of where that whole Lionheart stems from, is just having a heart of a lion.
Nice. I like that. So one thing that continues to be a challenge in the tiny house movement, we've all seen things are really moving on the legalization front, and particularly in Portland, but all over the country, piece by piece, state by state, it seems to be moving in the pro tiny house direction. One area where I haven't seen very much movement is in the financing, in that a tiny home is affordable, but it's very difficult to get a loan for it, and so it ends up being not available to those who really need an affordable home.
Absolutely.
What have you seen? Your clients, coming in with. Have you seen any creative financing options, or what? And what can you do as a builder to help make that more accessible?
Absolutely. So I can talk a little more to the flexible options and like things that people have done that are a little outside of the norm. And then I know we have a partner that Richard will chat about as well. So we actually financed our home and we used an unsecured line of credit. So basically what folks can do is be credit approved and have a line or a loan that they get depending on their bank, depending on what they're approved for, and they can use that for basically whatever they want to. And your home is not collateralizing that. So basically it's like having just a whopper of a credit card. Typically the interest rates are a lot better, but that is what we did to finance our build originally, and that gave us a great kickstart. So there are definitely places you can do that for larger amounts, and I've seen folks go with that. We of course have a few clients that have been further along in life than we have, and we're able to do cash, so that's obviously always an option. But definitely looking at alternative financing is a great idea. Well, things are still progressing and becoming more tiny friendly, but typically, yeah, either an unsecured loan or line of some sort. I've also seen folks who've owned their truck outright. They have a beautiful new truck and they refinanced on that to get the cash from it. And because they had that available. So just looking at what assets you have basically.
Yep.
And your credit, your belongings, what have you, is there's lots of possibilities if you get creative.
Nice.
And then for Lionheart Homes, we actually have financing available through a partnership with Liberty Bank of Utah.
Okay.
And that's really great for potential clients, because we kind of have that involved with us, that we can send them through that partnership and have that available. And really what allowed us to get to that point is being very detailed in our inspection process and who we work with to provide those detailed reports. This bank is comfortable with financing because of they know the quality and the what gets put into this home, so to be able to back it.
Right. And because the Liberty Bank is actually doing like more mortgage like loans, like 10, 15, 20-year loans.
Correct.
Yeah, and that's a tough nut to crack, because that's what actually would make a tiny house affordable, is to, for someone to be able to finance it over the course of, 15 years or more, like a mortgage.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Do you know what the interest rates are like on those loans? Are they significantly higher than, just like what people are getting for a single family?
Sure. So the last time I checked, I was going through their previous brochure. I haven't looked lately for their current rate, because prime rate did just change a few weeks ago. So that is going to change everything lending related, of course.
Yep.
But I believe they were around 8%.
Yeah.
Which isn't horrible. Obviously, it's a lot more than a mortgage, but it's a lot less than a credit card. So
yeah, certainly a lot less than a credit card.
Yeah.
Well, one thing that I like to ask all my guests is, what are 2 or 3 resources that helped you when you were building your tiny house that you'd like to share with our listeners?
I think if anybody was interested in potentially doing a DIY build themselves and they wanted to design something, I know for us in our design phase of designing our house in our Duchess model, like I said, we took us about 8 months to design. We used Google SketchUp, and we taught ourselves how to use that program, and that helped tremendously. I mean, we rebuilt the house, I don't know, probably 8 to a dozen times on SketchUp, just to really tweak everything before we actually were doing it in person physically and like having to move things and adjust things. It really saved a lot of time and materials and frustration just doing it on SketchUp.
Nice. And did you just like learn from YouTube? Did you take a course? Like, how did you learn SketchUp?
Yeah, basically just YouTube, just a bunch of tutorial videos on YouTube. And,
nice.
We got it to a good, I don't think we're complete professionals at, Google SketchUp.
Yeah.
But we got enough understanding of it to make, that model happen. So
nice.
I have to be a complete nerd and say our local library was great. We actually did a lot of research on just different techniques for things that we were already familiar with and just really wanted to brush up on. And, they have great ideas for, air movement and, more minute things. There's just so many resources out there that are free and, accessible to folks that you can, rent ebooks and things and read about, different, types of physics and things that go into processes that you're, are a little more well-rounded if you're, again, trying to DIY things yourself that really get down into the nitty-gritty that it takes to do that.
Nice. Well, Richard and Cassie, Saude, thank you so much for being guests on the show. This was really fun.
Thanks so much for having us. It was great.
Thank you so much to Richard and Cassie Saude of Lionheart Homes for being guests on the show today. You can find the show notes, including photos of their various homes that they've built and lots of links to social media accounts and more, plus a complete transcript from this episode at thetinyhouse.net/219. Again, that's thetinyhouse.net/219. Well, that's all for this week. I'm your host, Ethan Waldman, and I'll be back next week with another episode of the Tiny House Lifestyle Podcast.